I took off the safety gloves before he finished talking. That's what I remember most. The sound of the rubber snapping against my wrist as I pulled them free. He was still explaining the warning, still pretending it was procedure, but everyone on the line had already stopped working. They were listening without looking at me. I could feel it. The heat from the machines, the metal smell in the air, the weight of a decision I hadn't planned to make that morning. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just placed the gloves on the conveyor belt and said, "Keep it." The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was disbelief. Because quitting without a backup wasn't brave where we worked. It was reckless. And I knew, the second I turned toward the exit, that whatever pride pushed me through that door was going to cost me more than the job. I had worked in that factory since I was 19, long enough that the noise stopped feeling loud and started feeling normal, long enough that my body adjusted to waking up before sunrise without complaint. The place shaped you, not just your schedule, your posture, your expectations, even the way you measured worth. We produced parts no one outside the industry ever thought about. Small components that disappeared inside larger machines. Invisible work. Reliable. Repetitive. You could do it half asleep once you learned the rhythm. Most of us came from the same neighborhoods, same schools, same understanding. Steady work mattered more than pride. You didn't question supervisors. You didn't ask why certain promotions always skipped the same people. You showed up, kept your head down, and hoped to retire before your back gave out. I wasn't loud. I wasn't rebellious. If anything, I was known for being consistent. I trained new hires, covered extra shifts when someone got sick. I memorized production targets without needing to check the board. For years, that felt like security. But there were small things that chipped at me. Jokes that weren't quite jokes. Comments about people like you when mistakes happened on someone else's line. Being passed over for a team lead role twice, both times given to someone with less experience but the right attitude. I told myself it didn't matter, that the paycheck cleared the same way. Shame is subtle in places like that. It doesn't arrive in a single insult. It accumulates, in glances, in who gets called by their last name and who gets called kid, in who gets corrected privately and who gets corrected in front of everyone. At home, I carried it quietly. My wife would ask about my day, and I'd give her the clean version. The version where nothing stuck. We had bills, a mortgage that didn't care about workplace politics, a daughter starting high school who already looked at me like I should have answers about the world. I convinced myself endurance was maturity, that swallowing frustration meant strength, that quitting without another job lined up was something irresponsible men did. Until the morning he called me out in front of everyone. It wasn't about the mistake. The mistake was minor. We'd all made worse. It was about tone, about the way he said my name like it was evidence, about the pause he left afterward, giving the line time to register who was at fault. The men beside me didn't look up, not because they agreed, because they understood the rule. And something in me, after years of absorbing it, finally decided I didn't. He didn't yell. That would have been easier to fight. He stood a few feet away from the line, clipboard tucked under his arm, and asked me to step forward. The machines kept running for a few seconds before someone hit the slow switch. The sound dropped from a roar to a grind. Everyone could hear us now. "You know why we're here," he said. I didn't. Not really. A minor alignment issue on the last batch. It had already been corrected. No delays. No damage. But he listed it like a pattern, like I'd been waiting for this moment to fail. Then he said it. "We need people who can keep up. If that's too much, we can reconsider your position." The words weren't about performance. They were about replacement. A few men shifted their weight. No one spoke. I felt heat rise up my neck, not from embarrassment alone, but recognition. This wasn't discipline. It was positioning. A warning delivered publicly, to make something clear. I opened my mouth to respond, to point out the record, the overtime, the years. But I saw his expression before I did. Detached. Certain. He wasn't inviting discussion. He was drawing a line. And suddenly, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. No amount of quiet compliance was going to earn respect in a room that had already decided what I was worth. The shame I'd been carrying for years tightened into something sharper. Not rage, clarity. I looked down at my hands, still in the gloves, blackened at the fingertips from grease, hands that had kept that line moving for over a decade. "You're right," I said. He blinked, surprised by the agreement. "You do need someone who can keep up." I pulled off the gloves slowly, one finger at a time, and set them on the moving belt. The rubber caught for a second before sliding forward with the rest of the parts. "I won't be here tomorrow." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just final. The silence that followed felt heavier than any insult. A few men looked at me then, not approving, not disapproving, just aware that I'd broken something unspoken. The supervisor tried to recover. "Let's not make emotional decisions," he said. "You've got responsibilities." I did. That was the problem. I nodded once. "I know." Then I walked toward the exit, each step louder in my head than the machines ever were. I didn't have another job. I didn't have a plan. What I had was the sudden realization that staying would cost me more than leaving ever could. And that cost had already been accumulating for years. The first week felt like relief disguised as courage. I woke up at the same hour out of habit, but there was no siren, no steel door, no line waiting for me. Just quiet. I told myself I'd made the right decision. That dignity was worth instability. That something better would come because I'd finally refused to accept less. By the second week, the relief thinned. Applications went out. Calls didn't come back. Interviews ended with phrases like overqualified or not the right fit. I started leaving parts of my factory experience off my resume, then adding them back in, unsure which version of myself was more employable. At home, I tried to keep things steady. I told my wife it might take time. She nodded, supportive in the way people are when they're calculating in private. Bills didn't pause out of respect for principle. The mortgage notice arrived on schedule. Groceries cost the same, whether you were proud or unemployed. News from the factory filtered back through old coworkers. They'd replaced me within days. A younger hire. Cheaper. Eager. The line kept moving. The world didn't shake because I'd walked out. That stung more than I expected. Shame returned. But different now. Not from being talked down to, but from doubt. Had I confused pride with impulsiveness? Had I gambled my family's stability on a moment of emotion? I stopped driving past the factory. I couldn't stand seeing the parking lot full without my car in it. Then something else surfaced. A former coworker called one evening. Quiet voice. He told me the supervisor had started targeting others. Same tone, same public corrections. "You leaving?" he said. "It changed something." I didn't know what that meant at first. Then I did. The silence I'd broken hadn't closed behind me. It had widened. A few men had started speaking up in small ways, asking questions, requesting clarification. Nothing rebellious, just less automatic obedience. Management responded by tightening rules, more monitoring, less tolerance. Tension spread through the floor like a hairline crack in metal. Meanwhile, my savings dropped lower than I liked to admit. I sold tools I'd kept for years, picked up temporary shifts loading trucks at night. Physical work I knew, but without benefits, without security. Every hour felt borrowed. The hardest moments weren't financial. They were internal. Standing in line at another warehouse interview and recognizing the same dynamic already forming. The same glances, the same hierarchy, realizing that leaving one place didn't erase the pattern. One afternoon, after another rejection, I sat in my car longer than necessary. Engine off, phone in my hand. I could have called the factory, asked for reconsideration, framed it as misunderstanding. They might have taken me back. On worse terms, but back. My pride wasn't the only thing at stake anymore. My daughter asked me that night if I was taking a break from work. I told her yes, and in that answer, I heard how close I was to shrinking myself to make the decision easier to live with. The cost of quitting wasn't just unemployment, it was the daily temptation to regret it. And I hadn't decided yet whether I could afford that. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, while I was unloading boxes behind a grocery store for cash. It wasn't from the factory. It was from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a former supplier rep who used to visit our plant. He'd heard, through someone else, that I'd left. He didn't ask why. He asked something different. "Do you still remember how that line actually runs?" he said. I did. Not the version written in manuals. The real one. The shortcuts that kept production steady. The small adjustments that prevented waste. The timing no supervisor ever bothered to understand. He told me he'd just partnered with a small operation trying to launch a competing facility. Lean, underfunded, struggling with setup. They needed someone who knew the work from the floor up, not from an office. "It's not stable yet," he said, "and it's not pretty. But it's yours to shape." I drove home that night with the windows down, even though it was cold. The offer wasn't safer than going back. It was risk layered on top of risk. Fewer guarantees. More responsibility. My wife listened quietly while I explained it. No promises, no certainty, just possibility. "Is it respect?" she asked. That stopped me. "Yes," I said, "it is." The next morning, I called the number back before I could talk myself out of it. The first weeks were brutal. Bare concrete floors, machinery half installed, teams unsure of each other. I worked alongside them, tightening bolts, recalibrating settings, redrawing workflow charts at night at the kitchen table. For the first time, when something went wrong, people asked how to fix it. Not who to blame. Word traveled fast back to the old factory. They heard about the new operation, about who was leading the floor, about how quickly production stabilized once systems were corrected. One afternoon, months later, I got another call. This time, it was from my former supervisor. He kept it professional, asked about my current role, mentioned rumors of expansion. Then, carefully, he suggested there might be room for discussion about collaboration. I let him finish. Then I said the only sentence that mattered. "You needed someone who could keep up." Silence. "We do," he admitted. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't remind him of the line, the gloves, the public warning. I didn't need to. "I already found somewhere that does," I said, and I ended the call. That was the moment it became clear. Quitting without a backup had cost me comfort, sleep, security. But staying would have cost me something I couldn't rebuild. Respect, first from others, and finally from myself. The new factory never became large. It didn't need to. We grew slowly, carefully. Every hire mattered. Every system was built with input from the floor, not imposed from above. I made it a rule early on. Correction happens privately, credit happens publicly. It wasn't revolutionary, it was basic respect. But basic respect changes how people stand at work. It changes how they speak. Money was tight at first. There were months I wondered if I'd dragged my family into something unstable again. But this time, the strain felt different. It wasn't tied to humiliation. It was tied to building. My daughter visited once during a school break. She watched the line run, asked questions about timing and materials. One of the workers asked me for advice in front of her, not because he had to, but because he trusted the answer. On the drive home, she said, "You look different here." I knew what she meant. The old factory kept operating too. I don't pretend they collapsed because I left. Systems bigger than one man rarely do. But turnover increased. Production issues surfaced that had once been absorbed quietly. The supervisor who'd warned me transferred out within a year. We crossed paths once at an industry event. No confrontation, no apology, just a nod of recognition. We both understood the line that had been crossed back then. Quitting without a backup had cost me months of doubt, money I couldn't spare, and nights where fear pressed against my ribs. But it also forced something open. I stopped mistaking endurance for strength. I stopped accepting shame as the price of stability. And I learned that walking away without a safety net isn't reckless when the ground you're standing on is already collapsing beneath you. That decision cost me. It also gave me the first workplace where I didn't have to shrink to survive.